Okay, so here we have the final mesh that I've created for this particular masterclass, and just go into a little bit of backstory on the composition that we have here. So this particular model is about the fourth or fifth idea that I'd come up with. I'd really kind of gone back and forth on what I wanted to do compositionally, or even just thematically, and after a lot of humming and hawing and playing around with different ideas that were ranged all over the place, I kind of came back to this core world that I have been writing and playing around and designing through pretty much my whole 3D career, based around this graphic novel idea that I've had, that I draw an awful lot of inspiration from, especially in the science fiction end of things. So it was nice when I came back to that place and decided that I could sort of use that sandbox that I'd already created to produce this mesh. Um, there were a few goals that I had set out to have happen right away artistically, and that I knew I wanted to kind of set for myself. Nothing too crazy, just some sort of key points to kind of keep me penned in, so I didn't go too crazy with it and sort of spiral it all out of control and do too much back and forth, which is a chief concern for me when I'm doing any kind of 3D work or any kind of artistic work, is that I like to set myself a border, a fence, and kind of work within that. And sometimes you skirt the edge a little bit, and sometimes you break your own rules. But for the most part, it's good for me to stay sort of level. Um, Now, the key points that I was hoping to achieve in the composition was I kind of envisioned this root-like structure down here, with all the conduits and piping and all sort of forming into this root system, like an old, really old tree, an old growth tree. And part of the reason for that is that the backstory on the piece is that it's a man-machine interface. It's sort of a central control point for a massive spaceship that has a large crew of people. And the chair itself is the interface for the pilot, or the navigator, as I would call it. And the large apparatus behind her is the ship's brain, or the ship's computer. And sort of the two together form the overall sort of operations of everything on the ship. So the composition has to feel like, you know, a large amount of systems, if not all the systems on the ship, are sort of at some point or another finding their way to this sort of central point. So the first goal with the tree-like structure, the whole reason for it was to try to give a sense of this organic nature, that the ship is alive, and it's almost like the nerve center of it all. Um, so playing with that organic inorganic uh, sort of juxtaposition, I wanted very linear shapes, very solid, very basically easily identifiable shapes within the pipes and the flanges and all the all the guts of everything. But it still had to have this sort of feel of, you know, nerve clusters or veins or internal, sort of organic bits that you would come to know from a living organism. So compositionally, I want to achieve the primary focus being the chair, the pilot or the navigator. So we want to make sure, as you can see, with these main conduits, with secondary piping, the wiring of the halo itself, um, the gangway here, the railing, and the roots themselves, or the pipes themselves, that and sort of the support structures for the chair, that everything came to this one central place and it sort of framed this place, but at the same time not giving you the feeling that like we're forcing you there. We want it to be a very voluntary experience. So your eye just wants to travel there, and that was a key point in the composition that I wanted to achieve. Uh, for some reason, that just sort of really reached out to me as being a very important element. I also wanted to make sure that I was demonstrating solid examples of high to low contrast, and both in the detailing, but also in the clustering of certain details. So we wanted to give your eye areas where it could rest, like such as the monitor cluster versus the scaffolding area to stand while operating it, and the grading itself to the paneling around the incline here. And it was very important to me when I was thinking about the composition and of what the final image was going to be, that I wanted to make sure um, that I didn't over design. I didn't want to make the individual pieces be too complex. They needed to, have detail and be attractive and engaging and look good and have enough complexity that you got excited about it, but at the same time you didn't get overwhelmed with the surface detail. So this was a very deliberate decision, and that made the modeling in some ways easier in order to build all the initial shapes. But I knew there were also going to be a lot of shapes, so then it became a lot about management and placement and layout and just overall composition. Um, Now, obviously, the one-off here and where a lot of the detail is being focused is the chair itself and how that all integrates. So that was sort of where I spent my time design-wise in making an interesting sort of standalone piece. Also, the monitor section over here. When I initially was putting it all together, it sort of seemed like an afterthought. I felt like I hadn't really put enough into it, and through some critiques and bouncing back and forth with some colleagues, it kind of came to light that it needed to be a little bit more thought out. So you'll see from where my blocking came from and where we ended up that that was a very valid concern.